The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets that evening, turning the quiet roadside into a blur of water and dim streetlights. Daniel Harper gripped the worn steering wheel of his old pickup truck, his tired eyes scanning the road ahead. Life had not been kind to him lately. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, the refrigerator was nearly empty, and tomorrow morning he would stand in a courtroom where a judge would decide whether he lost the only house he and his young son had left. But that night, none of those worries were what made him press the brakes so suddenly. Two small figures stood alone on the shoulder of the dark highway. Twin girls. They looked no older than 8. They were soaked from the rain, their small backpacks clutched tightly, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Cars rushed past them without slowing down, spraying water onto their shoes. For a brief moment, Daniel considered driving on. He was already late to pick up his son from a neighbor's house, and trouble seemed to follow him wherever he went. But something in their eyes stopped him, something that reminded him of his own child. And in that moment, without realizing it, Daniel Harper made a decision that would change his life forever. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe to the channel if you believe that even the smallest act of compassion can change someone's destiny. Daniel pulled the truck over and stepped out into the rain. The cold wind bit through his thin jacket as he approached the girls carefully, not wanting to frighten them. They looked up at him with a mixture of hope and hesitation, as if they weren't sure whether the stranger walking toward them was someone to trust. Up close, Daniel noticed their matching jackets, their identical dark curls stuck to their cheeks from the rain, and the trembling in their hands as they held onto each other. They were clearly terrified. Daniel gently offered them the safety of his truck and asked if they were lost. After a moment of hesitation, they climbed inside, grateful for the warmth. The heater roared to life, fogging the windows as the girls slowly began to calm down. They explained in small, nervous voices that they had gotten separated from their driver earlier that evening. Their father was supposed to meet them at a nearby courthouse after school, but the driver's car had broken down miles away. When they tried to walk toward town, they became lost along the empty highway. Daniel's stomach tightened when he heard the word courthouse. Tomorrow morning, he would be standing in one, not as a visitor, but as a defendant. Still, that thought didn't matter right now. What mattered was getting these girls somewhere safe. Daniel drove slowly through the rain toward town, his mind filled with worry. He didn't have much money, barely enough gas to get home. But when he noticed the girls shivering in the back seat, he pulled into a small diner glowing warmly on the corner of Main Street. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The smell of hot soup and fresh bread filled the room. Daniel ordered 2 bowls of chicken soup and grilled sandwiches for the girls. It cost nearly the last of the cash he had in his wallet, but he didn't hesitate. Watching them eat reminded him painfully of the nights he had skipped meals so his son Noah could have enough. As the girls warmed up, their fear slowly faded. They talked quietly about school, about their favorite cartoons, about how their father was always busy, but tried his best to make time for them. Daniel listened with a soft smile, though his thoughts drifted constantly back to Noah waiting at home. After dinner, the diner owner helped Daniel contact the local police station. Within minutes, officers arrived to safely take the girls home. Before they left, one of the twins turned back and gave Daniel a quick hug. It was sudden and sincere, the kind of hug only a child can give. Daniel stood in the rain watching the police car disappear down the road, unaware that the simple kindness he had shown would soon echo into the most important moment of his life. The next morning arrived too quickly. Daniel barely slept. His small house creaked quietly as the first rays of sunlight pushed through the curtains. Noah sat at the kitchen table eating cereal while Daniel tried to hide the worry etched across his face. Today's court hearing would determine whether the bank could take their home. Daniel had fallen behind on payments after losing his construction job months earlier. Despite working multiple temporary jobs, it hadn't been enough. Now everything rested in the hands of a judge he had never met. Daniel dropped Noah at school and drove toward the courthouse, his stomach heavy with dread. The courthouse towered above the street, cold and imposing. People moved quickly through its doors, their footsteps echoing in the large marble halls. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat quietly on the wooden bench, his worn jacket folded neatly in his lap. Around him were lawyers, clerks, and people whispering about cases far more important than his own. Then the courtroom doors opened. Everyone stood. The judge entered. Daniel lifted his eyes and froze, because sitting at the bench was a tall, serious man whose face suddenly seemed very familiar. Judge Michael Bennett, the father of the twin girls. For a moment the judge scanned the room calmly as he organized his files. His expression was professional, distant, the way judges often appear in courtrooms where emotions run high. Then his eyes reached Daniel. Recognition flashed across his face. A subtle pause followed. No one else in the room seemed to notice, but Daniel did. The judge remembered him. Memories of the previous night clearly crossed Judge Bennett's mind. The rain, the frightened girls, the stranger who had helped them without asking for anything in return. Still, the judge said nothing. Court rules demanded fairness, distance, and professionalism. One by one, cases were called. People stepped forward, argued their situations, and received rulings that would affect their lives forever. Finally, Daniel's name was called. He stood slowly, his hands slightly shaking as he approached the front of the courtroom. The bank's attorney began explaining the situation in cold, practiced words. Missed payments, outstanding debt, legal right to foreclose. Every sentence felt like another nail sealing Daniel's fate. Daniel didn't argue much. He explained honestly that he had lost his job, that he was working again now, that he only needed more time, but legal systems rarely run on hope alone. When he finished speaking, the courtroom fell quiet. Judge Bennett looked down at the file in front of him. Then slowly, he looked up. For several long seconds, the room remained silent. The judge cleared his throat and spoke calmly. He acknowledged the bank's legal position, but also noted Daniel's recent employment records, the efforts he had made to recover financially, and the responsibility of raising a young child alone. The courtroom listened carefully. Then Judge Bennett made his decision. Instead of immediate foreclosure, he granted Daniel a 6-month extension to repay the overdue balance. During that time, the bank could not remove him from the house. Gasps quietly moved through the room. It was a rare decision, a chance, a second chance. Daniel stood there stunned, barely able to believe what he had heard. But the judge wasn't finished. Before moving on to the next case, Judge Bennett looked directly at him and said something that would stay with Daniel forever. He said that sometimes the measure of a person isn't how much money they have or how successful they appear, but how they treat others when they think no one important is watching. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest as the words sank in. The judge didn't mention the previous night. He didn't mention his daughters, but Daniel understood. Weeks passed. Daniel worked harder than he ever had before, taking every shift available, repairing houses, fixing roofs, doing whatever honest work he could find. Slowly, the overdue payments began to shrink. Life was still difficult, but now there was hope. One afternoon, as Daniel returned home from work, he noticed a black car parked outside his house. Standing beside it were the twin girls from that rainy night, and their father, Judge Bennett. The girls ran forward excitedly, hugging Daniel again like they had known him for years. Their father walked over more slowly, a warm but respectful smile on his face. He explained that his daughters had insisted on finding the man who helped them. They had never stopped talking about him. The judge thanked Daniel sincerely for protecting his children when they were scared and alone. He admitted that judges are trained to remain impartial in court, but as a father, he would never forget what Daniel had done. Then he handed Daniel a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter of recommendation and contact information for a construction company owned by an old friend of the judge. A company looking for reliable workers. It wasn't charity, it was opportunity. Daniel's eyes filled with emotion as he realized how one small act of kindness had quietly changed the direction of his life. Now, before this story ends, we have a special request. Comment below with the word kindness if you believe even the smallest good deed can come back in ways we never expect. Months later, Daniel stood in front of his house watching Noah ride his bike down the street. The mortgage payments were finally under control, his new job was stable, and life felt steady again. Not perfect, but hopeful. Sometimes destiny doesn't change through big dramatic moments. Sometimes it changes through a simple decision made on a rainy night, when someone chooses to stop the car instead of driving past. If this story touched your heart even a little, Please like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still exists, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this, because the world may feel harsh sometimes. But stories like this remind us that compassion still has the power to change lives.